as Mary said, yeah, I'm Kevin. I'm the CTO on Fido, not on Fido, sorry. And I have been wanting to give this talk for years. This is a talk I've been afraid to give. It's not that I haven't had the opportunity. I've actually been a little bit afraid to give this talk. And you'll see maybe a little bit why. But I can show the reason for this talk very quickly. How many of you in this room are in some way responsible for setting a salary for someone else? Most of you. How many of you, wait, hands up still. How many of you actually understand how salary works? Yeah, not nearly so many. That's why I wanted to give this talk. I have had amazing mentors in my career. I've had the benefit of training, and I've read lots of books. I did not really understand how salary worked until I became like a CTO and was part of the entire process. So I'm going to try and distill decades of mistakes I've made as a manager into about half hour so that you can not make those mistakes. You can get to make some new ones. So if we're going to talk about salary, we got to start with the budget. That's where the money comes from, right? So you need to understand that. And this is the part that you generally don't have visibility into if you're a lead. You kind of are at the tail end of that process. So I'm going to give you just a little bit of insight into how budgets come into being. To start with, you have a fiscal calendar in your company. Every company does. And I'm going to say, by the way, this is an amalgam of a bunch of companies I've worked at, a bunch of companies I'm aware of. Every company is slightly different, just caveat there. But somewhere in the middle, somewhere after the middle of your fiscal year, two things happen. Your people team or your HR team does a benchmarking exercise. So if you're a lead, usually you're going to get a mail from somebody in the HR team saying, here are the people in your team. Can you confirm their levels and their job descriptions, right? A lot of you have gotten that mail. And that's what they're doing. They're setting up to do this benchmarking exercise. So they're going to work with a company like Radford to find out what salaries are for the jobs and the levels in your city. That's what that exercise is. Similarly, at the same time, your executive team or senior leadership team, they're starting to think about what are the big plans for next year. What are the things that they want to do? What's the strategy? So that happens about somewhere in the middle of the year. That data goes to the finance team. The finance team takes that data. They do an estimate of how much money they think you're going to make next year based on how much money you're making right now and some of these new projects. And then they'll look and also say, well, given where the salaries are going, this is about how much it'll cost just to continue to run the business. And hopefully there's a space between those two. And then that data goes back to the executive team. The executive team then says, okay, well, given that we're going to make this much money, assuming this, let's figure out how many people we want to hire next year. And what things we're going to do, are we going to buy new software or those kinds of things. So that happens. Now we get into the fourth quarter. That data goes back to the finance team, and the finance team generates your initial budget. So that's where your first draft of the budget comes from. That budget goes back to the leadership team, who says, okay, we like this, we don't like this, we want to adjust this, and kind of goes back and forth for a little while until everyone's happy. And then in the fourth quarter, usually you have your board meeting where the board approves that budget. And when that happens, when the board approves that budget is locked. It is now locked. It is done. So that's important. That's a very important moment. Now the budget is ready. Now it goes back to the finance team. And the finance team now makes a plan. Okay, given that the budget that's been approved, we're going to make a plan on how all this stuff is going to lay out during the year. And now we're kind of done with the year. We start the next year. And now is when it comes to you, the lead. Because now you get to hire people, you get to promote them, you get to give them raises, everything is cake and awesome. If you look at this process and think about it not as a budget process, if you think about this in terms of a software process, right? What software process is this? It's a waterfall, right? This is a very close to a waterfall process, and it has all the same implications. When I talked about locking the budget, that's pretty similar to locking a spec. And the reason is, for somebody like me, somebody like Mary, in our jobs, but anybody with budget responsibility in a company, you're judged partially on your ability to manage to that budget. You don't get to spend whatever money you want. You've agreed on a budget, sometimes 18 months prior, and now you're going to be expected to manage to that budget no matter what's going on. And if you don't do well doing that, you're not doing your job and you will get fired. Also, another thing about it, so let's say you're a lead and your manager tells you, okay, so congratulations, you're going to get to hire 4 people into your team this year. And you go, oh, that's great. I'm going to hire them all on January 1st. They're going to all start January 1st. I can't wait. Normally, when they lay out that budget, when the finance team lays out that budget, unless you're working on like a super critical project or something, they're going to put those headcount and they're going to spread them across the year. So maybe you'll hire 1 in the first quarter, 1 in the second quarter, and so on. The reason why they do that is the following. There's 2 main reasons. One is if I hire somebody on January 1st, I'm paying a full year of salary for them, right? If I hire 4 people on January 1st, I'm paying 4 salaries. If I hire 1 person on January 1st, I'm paying a full year. If I hire 1 person on April 1st, I'm paying 3/4 of a year. If I hire 1 person on July 1st, half a year, and so on. So that brings the whole budget down a little bit over the course of the year. And you could say, well, in the end, though, you're paying all the salaries anyway, right? But at the end of the year, you're paying full salaries. Why does that matter? There's another reason why that matters. So when they do this kind of waterfall exercise where they're estimating how much revenue you're going to generate, they're using whatever data they have at hand, but it's an imprecise science. So what happens is, let's say they think you're going to make this much money, and instead you actually make this much money because there's economic factors or the features you thought were going to get a lot of adoption don't. That's okay if your spending is coming up like this. But if you hire all those people on January 1st, your spending is going to look a little bit more like this. Now you've got a gap, and you're going to have to address that often by laying off. So by instead spreading the spending through the year, they can look and see how revenue's doing and say, you know what, revenue's not where we thought it was. We're going to slow down our hiring, or we're even going to stop it. And that way we don't get into trouble. So if you ever have been in a company where they say, hey, we're going to do a hiring break, or we're going to do a hiring pause, or we're going to stop hiring for the year, that's usually a sign that revenue is not coming up, is not in line with where the spending you were expecting to have. And so they want to avoid putting themselves in a bad situation. That's an important thing that isn't always made clear. This is another implication of this kind of waterfall process. They're estimating, you're making a lot of guesses very early, and those guesses are sometimes right, and those guesses are sometimes wrong. So let's assume everything is great, and you are making an offer. How much do you pay somebody? How much do you know, how do you decide how much to make an offer to them? Well, there's a few things you should consider. Obviously, their current salary is important. That tends to be what people think about, and then they stop thinking, right? Just whatever your current salary is, and then plus or minus some amount. There's a bunch of other things you need to think about. One important thing that people very rarely think about is a previous salary. What was the salary you had before the salary you have now? The reason that's important is some people sometimes choose to actually take a pay cut, to take a role. I'm going to talk a little bit more about reasons why somebody might do that in a minute or two. And when I've done that, let's say I've taken a pay cut to take a job, and now I'm looking for a new job, you make me a salary offer, I'm not comparing it to my current salary, I'm comparing it to my last salary, because that's actually how much money I should be making. I took a pay cut, but that's not how much money I should be making. I should be making however much money I used to make. And you don't necessarily think about that when you're making the offer. Normally, people will actually volunteer that information in the discussion. They'll say, hey, I took a pay cut, but they don't always do that. And it might be worth actually looking into it if you think that might be the case. Another thing, the experience. And normally we look at their sort of very narrow experience, like they've been a developer, they've been a tester, and I'm hiring a tester, and how much specific experience they have for the role. That actually devalues a lot. So let's say somebody did do a change where they maybe were a product manager and switched into development. That experience is super valuable. They might have been a really great product manager. Now they're actually a relatively inexperienced developer and being paid like one, but you might want to actually give some value to their previous role. That makes sense within the industry, but it also makes sense because we have so many people coming into our industry who are in their second career. If I was a chef or a lawyer, having that diversity of background in my team is actually valuable, and I maybe want to assign value to that and actually get that person into my team at a higher salary. Your company stage of growth. You may be in a seed stage startup, right? So you're not going to try and beat Google on offers. But you also may be in a startup that just took a round. Now you very publicly took in a bunch of money. You've been paying people like you're a seed stage startup, but guess what? You just took in 100 million euros or something. Now you're making an offer to someone and you're saying like, hey, we're an early stage startup and here's our crummy offer. And they're like, you just took 100 million? I think you can pay me market wages, right? You got to think about that because it's an adjustment that you don't always make in your own head. Your company, so you do this your bands exercise, you do this benchmarking exercise. What that tends to mean, and we can debate the accuracy of some of these benchmarking products, but what that should mean is that when you're hiring somebody, you know more or less, like let's say how much a senior developer makes in startups of about your size in Berlin. So if somebody's coming in and they're way above that, you actually need to make a decision. Is this because they're bringing something extra to the table, or is this just they're overpaid? And should I reflect that in the salary? Same thing if they're coming way under. Is this a person that's been radically underpaid, and I should fix that? But there's one area that you also have to think about. See, it gets complicated. There's a lot to keep in your head here. It gets natural after a while. It just becomes part of your thinking, which is specialized skill sets. Because when you do these benchmarking exercises, it is literally like senior developer companies like 300 to 500, this much rounds in Berlin. If I'm looking for a specialized skill set, like let's say I need a amazing compiler expert. There's, I don't know, a dozen in Berlin. They're going to command a much higher salary because they have a very rare skill set. So the bands are meaningless in that case, right? So you have to keep that in mind as well. Your budget. So when they did that big plan, here's the big plan, and it's going to lay it out by quarter or even by month. Here's who we're hiring, and this is how much money we've budgeted for them to make. So that number is going to be available to you when you are making the offer. You can go over, everyone's going to be happy if you go under, in your company anyway, not the candidate. Everyone's going to be happy if you go under. If you go over, that's fine too, but if you go way over, again, somebody like me or somebody with budget responsibility, that money has to come from somewhere. It just doesn't get invented. So usually, it kind of all works out. Some people come in under, some people come over. You don't sweat it too much. But if you want to make an offer like 50% over or 100% over, that may mean another team loses one of their open positions to cover that amount. So just be aware of it. You can still try and do that offer. You're going to get a lot of pushback from within your own company. An important area to look at, and I think something people don't think about a lot when they think about salary, is whether the person you're trying to hire is coming from an underrepresented group. Yanni mentioned this in her talk earlier, right? Folks who come from underrepresented groups are dealing with a lot of bias in our industry and have been very traditionally underpaid. We can fix that, right? And I think we have a duty to fix that. If you try and bring in somebody, you see a really talented person, they're coming in with a much lower salary, and you think, oh, this is great, I'm going to make a great deal for the company. If they're coming out of an underrepresented group, that could be the result of systemic bias, and you should take a responsibility to fix it. Because you can bring them in at a bit higher, or you can bring them in at the normal, or like at their current salary. It's going to take them still a long time to catch up, even if you're being very fair about your raises. Instead, this is a great opportunity to just fix it in one swoop. Finally, when is your next salary review? People also don't think about this a lot. A lot of companies, you have a salary review, you can't do your salary review unless you've been at the company 6 months. If you're hiring somebody and you're 5 months before the salary review, that means that person won't get a raise for 17 months. That's kind of a long time. So what you may want to do is actually give them a little bit extra and explain to them, hey, you're going to miss the next salary review, so I'm incorporating, I think, some of what you would get in that salary review in your initial offer. Because it kind of is a bummer to start a company and then not get a raise sometimes for a year and a half. There's some things you should not consider. Do not consider these things. One is what others on the team make. It is not appropriate, I believe, to look at what everyone else is making and think about that when you make an offer. Why? Because coming into your company, I don't care what other people make. I just know what my salary, I think, should be. And if you want to tell me, well, I don't want to give you this because other people on the team don't make that, why should I care? Honestly, I mean, just why should that matter to me? There's many reasons why those people may make that salary. And that's another reason why you shouldn't be limiting somebody's coming in to everyone else's salary. It makes your job harder. Like, let's be clear, I'm not making your job easier by saying this, but it's also more fair. Because there's lots of reasons why that could happen. It could be that you're systemically underpaying your staff. That could be one of the reasons. It could also be that you're hiring me. I'm actually bringing in some experience that is really valuable to you. Or I'm coming in with a skill that is very rare, or whatever. Just saying that I'm the same level and therefore I should make the same amount, that doesn't incorporate all the beauties of all of us as individuals. So I don't like doing that as an excuse to not pay someone what they're worth. Sometimes have had leads say this to me, right? Somebody's coming in and it's more than you think they should make. You honestly don't think they should be making as much as they want. But it's taken you so long to fill this job that I just want to get it over with. That's a horrible reason to give a salary you don't think is fair, because now you're going to be living with that for a long time. So you're avoiding a short pain for a long one. It just doesn't seem that way at the time. So that's a horrible reason to do it. Just either give them the salary you think you should give them, or just keep looking. Finally, this one. There is absolutely no reason that any of us in this room should make more money than the people that work for us. I have often employed people that make way more money than I do. And for the same reason that individuals on a team shouldn't make exactly the same salary, it's absolutely the case. I've been lucky to hire people with way more experience than me, way smarter than me, and I am very happy to have them on my team. If you have a problem paying somebody, like having somebody work for you that makes more money than you should look inward, honestly. You need to think about, is this ego, right? Do I just feel uncomfortable with this situation? Because I'll tell you, if you are a manager and you want to increase your salary, the best way for you to increase your salary is to hire the best people you possibly can and to pay them what they're worth. That is the best way to increase your own salary. If you are trying to, if it worries you or makes you feel uncomfortable to pay somebody more than you're going to be limiting the quality and the talent on your own team, and it's just going to make you look bad. Go get really good people, pay them what they deserve, and you're going to get the good raises. I can tell you from direct experience. But understanding, right? Maybe you aren't Google. Maybe you aren't Google and you don't have unlimited money to pay somebody. There are still other ways that are non-monetary, right? That aren't salary. We get really fixated on salary as a number, right? Because it's an objective thing. But there are lots of reasons why people may be willing to take less salary and still come and work at your company. Some things that are obvious, right? Benefits, stock. Yeah, we're a startup and we're growing like crazy, and your stock in your crummy old industrial company is not worth anything. That's certainly a sort of non-salary monetary solution. But maybe your company actually supports higher education. We're going to help you get your advanced degree. We're going to support you while you do that. That's worth something to people, and they're very happy usually if you're going to do that maybe they'll take a lesser salary for a while. Maybe your company has these great learning opportunities, new roles that people can take on, or responsibilities that they wouldn't find in their current job. Maybe you have cool technology that's really interesting and a lot of people want to work on because it's the new thing. You've taken on the newest JavaScript framework or the new language or something like that. A lot of people actually are so excited to do that or so interested in to do that they're actually maybe willing to take a little bit less salary. Maybe somebody's making a career change. They're going from being a senior developer to a junior data scientist, or a product manager to developer, or developer to tester, or whatever. And so, relative to their new career, they're not that experienced. So maybe they'll take a bit of a pay cut in order to kind of grow in the new career. And if you can support them making that career change, they're totally willing to take less salary. If you have an interesting company culture, everybody has an interesting company culture. Oh, we're so great. I've never heard a company say our company culture sucks and no one likes working here and everybody here is stupid, and we all work with the most talented people in the industry. That said, there are genuinely things about your company. There's a reason why you work there. There's a reason why your peers work there, why the people that you work with, and that makes you happy to come to work. If there's things about your company that are interesting and different and compelling, people will, if they're going to be happy coming to work every day in the place that you are, they may be willing to actually step back a little bit in salary just because maybe they're making a great salary in a place they hate. And they just want to be in a place they enjoy for a little while. One thing you have to think about in this, though, if you're going to make one of these promises, you actually have to deliver on them. You can't tell people, hey, we do all these education credits and we do all this other stuff, and then somebody starts and they're like, hey, I want to go and get my PhD, and you say, nope, sorry, you got to work like 15 years before that's available to you. They're going to feel like you've lied to them, and they'll probably not stick around, and they're right to do so. A question I often ask candidates is, or even myself or other people thinking about a new job, what is this job going to set you up for? What's the job after this one that you're going to take? Where you want to go in your career? And that question to a candidate, and then explain to them how you're going to help them get that job, it may be enough for them to say, I can tell that you're going to support me in my career. It's worth it to me to maybe take a little bit less salary in order to join your company. Now let's talk about how you figure out how much to give somebody as a raise. This is also fraught with peril. I think about it like this. Not all companies do. So many companies think about it like this. This is the way I explain it and have always explained it to the people that work for me. There's two components. We won't talk about bonuses here. Bonuses are a whole other thing. But for salary and stock, a lot of you work for startups. A lot of you work for established companies that give stock grants or stock options. Salary is about looking backwards. What have you achieved since the last time we did a raise? And stock options are, where do I think you're going in the future? And these are two different mechanisms. One's looking forward and one's looking forward and one looking backwards. And the reason I want to differentiate these things is because you have to think about stock options as vesting over time, which means it's really about keeping you here, right? Giving you a reason to stay. And usually they're worth more money over time, which means that if you have somebody that's just growing and maturing and getting better, giving them more options is essentially paying them into the future for the growth you think they're going to have and giving them incentive to stay. Performance is just what have you been doing and how well have you been doing it, and let's acknowledge that in your salary and showing that you're adding value today. Some things to think about when you're figuring out what raise to give. Their performance relative to their level. Now, I want to be super clear. Their performance relative to your career pathing framework, not to the other people on their team. We're humans. We kind of compare people against each other, and that's wrong. If you have a career pathing framework, most of you do. The rest of you should be considering one if you don't already, because that is an objective measure that people can look at and say, am I doing what is expected of me? If people are doing that and you're comparing them against that, that is inherently as objective as you can be in a very subjective kind of way. Their place in the salary band. Again, some companies actually will enforce the salary band. You can't be below or above. Other companies, it's just guidelines. Most companies I've been in, it's mostly guidelines. So it's okay to be above it, but when you're above the salary band, that's essentially saying that you are not only one of the higher paid people in your own company, you're one of the higher paid people in companies similar to yours in your city. And when you think about this, you should be thinking, does that feel right to me? Is this person so good that they're probably one of the best in the city? Previous raises. People don't really think about this. There's a psychology, right? You get your raise every year, or you get your salary review, and you think about it, and you don't think about it relative to everyone else's salary reviews because you don't see those. You look at it compared to yours over the past several times, if you have that history. And what you're going to look at is this bigger or smaller than last year, or the year before, or the year before? Sometimes when we've had somebody that we felt has been underpaid in my team, we will systematically every year give them bigger raises, but without understanding that in their mind, I get big raises every year, right? And then, hey, guess what? They're now right where their salary should be, and you give them like a normal raise, even maybe a pretty good raise, it feels like they're getting a crappy raise because they're so used to these big raises. Similarly, you give somebody somebody's been really underperforming, you give them little tiny raises, and now actually they give them a normal raise, it feels like, oh my God, I've won the lottery. So you have to think about that. You have to empathize a little bit with the person and put yourself in their shoes. Their velocity, are they growing? Are they getting better, like year after year? That's more acceleration, but you know what I mean. Are they getting better year after year? Have they kind of found their role and they're getting very comfortable, and there's nothing wrong with that, but maybe they're kind of evening off? Or actually, have they maybe taken on too much and they're struggling a little bit? And you've got to look at that not only in the last year. The review is really about the last 6 months or the last year, but you have to think about that a little bit over time. And what is the story, again, you're telling them, because they're looking at their own history. If you're promoting them, obviously you're going to give them a raise. Hopefully you're going to give them a raise. And you have to think in terms of your salary budget. If you're a lead, usually you're given some raise budget for your team. One thing I will say, and I hope if you're a lead, your manager says to you, if you have a relatively small team, you shouldn't worry about hitting the budget exactly. Like, you shouldn't. Small team, that's way too much for you to worry about. Because you get the ability as a team, as the number of people grow, to make it all even out. So I generally tell people, if you have a team under like 10 or something, come reasonably close, but it doesn't have to be exact. But if you're managing like a larger group, if you're like a director, yeah, you should be hitting it pretty much right on, because you have enough different folks that you can make it work. Running short, I'm going to run a minute over. Sorry, Joe. Couple common mistakes. I am sorry. Well, you knew it was going to happen. But I'm coming to the end here. A common mistake, I see this so often, it's just laughable at this point. You get, normally if you're doing performance reviews, you're going to say, well, this part of my team hit their expectations, this part of my team missed their expectations, and this part of my team hit beyond their expectations. They exceeded my expectations. I can't tell you, every salary review, some lead, not even a new lead, even experienced leads, sends out a thing, it's like, 3/4 of my team exceeded expectations. When I see that, my first question is, I think your expectations are set a little too low, right? If everybody's exceeding your expectations, that usually means you're not actually judging them very well. Not everybody can be awesome. Sorry. Most of us are. Everyone in this room is. But if everyone's awesome, then kind of no one is. So you got to think very clearly. If you kind of feel yourself going in this direction, just be able to justify that. Be prepared to justify that, because somebody like me is going to be saying, that looks a little strange to me. Similarly, somebody is actually awesome. You promote them into a new level. They take on new responsibilities. And the very next review, they exceed your expectations again. When I see that, what I think you're doing is you're probably still comparing them to their old role and not to their new one. Because none of us can really take on a bunch of new stuff and still exceed expectations. It's just not realistic. So again, just question yourself very clearly when that happens. I hate tiny raises. Tiny raises are evil. Thank you. I hate, because what I think when I see a tiny raise, sometimes it's happened. I've been, I was a manager in the .com explosion. We had a raise budget of 3%. A lot of people got tiny raises that year. But at the same time, though, that's not the case now. If I see a 1% or 2% raise, I would even say 3%. What that looks like to me is that the lead is just avoiding a difficult conversation. Really, I don't want to. You shouldn't get a raise at all, but I don't want to talk to you about why you're not getting a raise. So I'm just going to give you a really crummy raise and hope you don't notice. So if you're going to give a 1% raise, just don't give a raise and have the difficult conversation, because you're actually doing them a better favor. The 1% raise is not going to be that meaningful to them anyway. So quick tip around this. If you're trying to figure out how to make budget, if you haven't figured this one out already, normally your team's going to have a range of salaries. Some people are making a lot of money, some people are making not so much. You can steal money from the people that are making a lot, kind of a Robin Hood complex, and steal a little bit from those making a lot, and give it to the folks not making a lot, and they're going to be so happy because it's going to be a big raise for them. So a way I tend to do this is, let's say you're going to give somebody a raise, and now they're going to make 101,400 euros. You know what? You might as well call it 100,000 euros. It's a nice round number. It's pretty psychologically satisfying. I'm making 100,000 euros. Take that 1,400 euros, give it to somebody making 45 on top of whatever you were going to give them already. That's a big raise for somebody like that, and they're really going to appreciate it. If you're looking for ways to give more to some of the folks making less. So I'm going to end on this thought. We make mistakes as managers all the time, 5 today, right? We make mistakes all the time, and I think I know this was discussed before. Salary is a mistake that's really hard to fix. If you pay someone less than they're worth, that may take them a very long time to recover from. They may never recover from it. And of all the mistakes we make, the ones that are permanent on the people that work for us, those are by far the absolute worst. So just be thoughtful, be deliberate, and make the effort to do your salary decisions right. Thank you.